Drugs in sport. So blood doping is a method of improving athletic performance by artificially improving the body's ability to produce oxygen. This can be done by injecting EPOs, which are in the body they produce, or they initiate the production of red blood cells, and increasing the amount of EPO will evidently increase the amount of red blood cells that are created. It can also be done by blood transfusions, so blood will be taken out of the body, stored and frozen for about 4 weeks, and this gives the body time to replace the blood that was lost, and then the blood will then be put back into the body through an infusion, and this will overall mean that the athlete will have more blood, which means they'll have more red blood cells, which means more oxygen can be transported around the body, therefore fighting against fatigue and things like that. So a study by Siegel et al. 1999 gathered subjects aged 21 to 35 and studied the effects that blood doping had on the body, like the hemoglobin levels and red blood cell levels, and it found that it actually increased by 4 to 6% after the blood doping. In terms of sports, this is actually a very beneficial improvement, as a 4 to 6% increase in performance is the difference between winning and losing a race potentially. So this study shows that overall blood doping can actually have a very beneficial effect on performance. Another study by Gunderson et al. 2003 gathered biological information from 50 Olympic cross-country skiers and found that 50% of them had high or abnormally high hematologic profiles, meaning that their red blood cell count, their hemoglobin count, was significantly higher than their opponents. This will overall have just given them a athletic advantage, and ultimately may be the reason why some of them have finished higher than others due to the fact that they were cheating using blood doping. Blood doping does have its downsides, however, as studies by Robertson et al. 2006 and Rice and Alfrey 2005 have shown, as abnormally high hematocrit levels can potentially be very dangerous, leading to things such as stroke and heart disease, and it is actually has the potential to increase these risks by around 14% overall, which could potentially be very risky to someone's life. So the studies do face their problems, however, as they are quite outdated. This is due to the legality of the situation, as it is illegal to blood dope, which means a lot of athletes, or especially elite athletes, won't really want to take part in blood doping, as it will affect their career drastically. The study by Siegel also had a very small sample size of 18. Once again, it's hard to gather participants who will actually want to take part in blood doping, so that's a reason for this. So in short, blood doping does help performance significantly and would potentially be the difference between an athlete's career being very successful and not. However, if they were to be found blood doping, this would lead to their career potentially being over, and also the abuse of blood doping can also potentially be very risky to their lives, having significant effects later in their life. So anabolic steroids are a synthetically made drug which act in a similar way to the hormone produced by the body, testosterone. So in this sense, they will promote the growth and repair of muscle after resistance training, which is evidently used by bodybuilders and things like that, as it's a great way to build muscle and maintain a good physique. Anabolic steroids are usually taken by injection, however they can be taken orally in the form of a pill or through the use of a gel. So a study by Caddy et al. 1999 gathered 19 elite level powerlifters, some who had used steroids in the past, some who hadn't, and assessed their trapezius muscle power. It was found that, and they assessed the muscle cells within these areas, and they found that although the composition of the fibres was the same, they had a significantly larger surface area in the fibres, which means that obviously the power output was also significantly higher due to the fact that they had more strength in these muscle fibres. And another study by Elishov et al. 1991 looked at the effects of steroids on strength, and they found that it had a significant effect on the powerlifters in the study, and it essentially led to a 5% increase in muscular strength. So from a performance aspect, a powerlifter with 5% more strength than their opponents would be leaps and bounds ahead and being able to lift significantly more weight, which would lead to them winning more events. So anabolic steroids have been shown to have a significant effect on performance in not only the bodybuilding industry, but the powerlifting industry as well. On the other hand, there are many adverse effects, as studies by Maravillas et al. 2005 and Kibble and Ross 1987 have shown, as it can lead to hypertension, so a high blood pressure. It can lead to blood clotting, jaundice, tendon damage, and behavioural disorders as well. So, although it does have positive effects, the effects that it has on health are very dangerous and can potentially cut lives short and change the way people live their daily lives. So there are some problems with the studies, and that is the fact that they don't have very large subject pools, evidently because steroids are not legal within the sporting industry in many aspects. And in the study by Elishov et al. Looked at the effect on steroids and strength. Another problem with the studies is that they are quite outdated, meaning some of the data collated since then might have potentially changed. However, it is unlikely since the effect of steroids is relatively known within the research industry. So overall, steroids do benefit performers greatly. However, the long-term abuse of steroids leads to many hampering effects of general quality of life that will be very negative on someone's future life after their career is finished. So beta blockers are a performance drug that is used to slow the contractions of heart, lower the blood pressure and things like that, and that can reduce the levels of anxiety and calm the nerves. So this is helpful in sports such as archery, where precision is very important. Beta blockers are taken through the ingestion of pills predominantly. So a study by Cruz et al. 1986 gathered 33 elite level marksmen, so professional elite shooters, and studied the effects that beta blockers had on their performance, and it was found that the accuracy of their shooting actually improved by 13.4%, which is extremely significant and would definitely be the difference between them potentially finishing last and first. So if they were to use beta blockers before an Olympic shooting event, for example, they could potentially win gold, whereas if they hadn't taken these and their opponents had, this would leave them at a significant disadvantage. And another study by Van Bach et al. 1987 studied the effects of a 6-month treatment plan with the use of beta blockers. They found a similar reduction in the of blood pressure and heart rate in the subject's resting and exercise components. So they measure these components at the start and at the end, and found that they had significantly decreased throughout this period. Reductions did show after 1 week, however, they grew more significant as the test period went on. There are some long-term adverse effects of using beta blockers, such as dizziness, weakness, drowsiness, and fatigue. This shows that when used responsibly, they can be very effective. However, the abuse of the drug does have many downsides. There are problems with the studies by Cruz et al. There are problems with the studies as they have small sample sizes and are quite outdated. However, both have strong points, such as the study by Cruz et al., which was a double-blind test, meaning the researchers and the subjects were not fully aware of who had taken what, which means that bias could not have had an effect on their tests. Beta blockers do have a significant effect on performance and improve it in sports such as precision sports, things like that. However, they aren't really effective in other sports such as football. They do have little downside, as previously mentioned. They do cause drowsiness, weakness, and things like that, but that is only when they abuse and too much is taken. So beta blockers are prohibited in many sports. So if an athlete was to be found taking beta blockers in the sports such as shooting, archery, things like that, they would be banned, because it does have a significant effect on their performance. So the human growth hormone is a naturally produced hormone created in the pituitary gland. It is involved in the cell regeneration and maintaining of the healthy tissue. However, there aren't new synthetic ways this is being made, and it is now being abused by athletes in many industries. It is taken through injection, but it can also be taken orally, and it can be digested as well. So a study by Sorgi et al. 2006 studied the effects of a recombinant human growth hormone through a 6-week training program, and they used this study on casual lifters, and they found that overall it did not have a significant effect on the subjects, things like muscle competition, muscle growth, and it didn't really have a great effect on their strength either. There was a slight growth overall, but this was mostly due to the fact that it was just improvement through training. So it had nothing really to do with human growth hormone from what is made clear by the study. Another study by Hamid et al. 2004 gathered 19 healthy elderly male subjects and studied the effects that the human growth hormone had on them. There was an original increase after 5 weeks. However, after that, the performance seemed to plateau. This may be due to the fact that as you get older, your production of human growth hormone does decrease. So an original spike in production of that may have caused the muscles to be more activated, but after a while, as the body became used to that level of human growth hormone, it began to plateau. The human growth hormone abuse does have more side effects than it appears to have positives. For example, it can lead to nerve and muscle and joint damage due to the growing effects that the hormone can have, potentially lead to things like giantism. And it can also lead to carpal tunnel syndrome, which is when there is pressure on a nerve located in the wrist, which then leads to numbness of this area, which is very negative and can have a detrimental effect on people's lives as they lose the ability to use things like their hands and things like that. There are negatives to the studies mentioned and used. For example, the study by Hamid et al. 2004 had quite an aging population in the study, which means it's not very valid and can't be used in the general population, as mentioned, age does affect the production of human growth hormone. So if a person in their mid-20s, for example, were to take human growth hormone, this would increase their already relatively high levels of the hormone. However, in older populations, the starting level of hormone is relatively low. So obviously they'll have had varying effects depending on age. And overall, there does not appear to be any reason to use HDH, as the physical benefits are not overly significant and the side effects are so much more impactful on someone's life. And if it were to be used long term, it would do far more bad than it would good. So creatine is a hormone that is naturally produced within the body, a substance, and it is used during exercise as a production of energy and is very useful for things that involve like high intensity, such as powerlifting mostly powerlifting. Creatine is also taken as a supplement to boost the levels of creatine, therefore boosting the levels of energy that they will have when lifting heavier weights, things like that. So a study by Richard et al. 1997 used 25 Division I American football players and supplemented them throughout a 28-day period with the creatine pills. They only supplemented 13 of them, 13, and didn't supplement 12. And they found that through the 28-day period, those who had been supplemented had a much greater increase in lifting volume. This was done using a double-blind test, so neither the researcher nor the subjects knew who was getting placebo pills, who was getting creatine pills. And another study by Kreider, 2003, also found that similar results in lifting performance, also opting to use the same double-blind method where neither researcher nor subject know who was getting what. Studies by Majika et al. 1996 and Javier et al. 2004 stated that the supplementation is not beneficial in many other sports. So, for example, they used swimming, and they found that sprinting performance between a group who had been using creatine supplementation and one that hadn't, there was no significant effect in performance. And in fact, they were relatively similar. So creatine supplementation was not overly beneficial in a swimming training sense, but it has been shown to be beneficial in other ways, such as, the weightlifting sense. So the studies do appear to have weaknesses such as the small pool size, meaning that some select results can have more of a significant effect on the overall data set. As there's less people, meaning if one results were to be significantly higher, it may bump the results up more than if it was a larger pool size. The studies are also not very up to date, as there's no real necessity for the continued study of creatine supplementation, as it's already pretty much cemented the effect that they do have. So in short, if an athlete is to be pursuing a career that relies on physique or strength, creatine supplementation is quite vital to this. and it can be very beneficial for their performance, and it has no real health repercussions, as it is a naturally produced hormone. It's naturally produced in the body, and yeah, it's just very beneficial for lifting performance, high intensity, things like that, as it's just a great source of energy. Finally, caffeine has many ergogenic effects on the body that aid in performance in many sports, I should say. However, in sports that require more precise movements, things like snooker, things like golf, caffeine is not really useful, as it can cause jitteriness in some areas and can be quite hard to focus when using caffeine. However, on the flip side, caffeine can have the effect of decreasing fatigue, improving mental function, and increasing reaction times, making them much faster. So, a study by Schneiker et al. 2006 gathered 10 male team sport athletes who then completed 2 exercise trials separated by 7 days, 60 minutes after the ingestion of caffeine or placebo pills. This was a double-blind test similar to many others, so no researcher or subjects were aware of who was getting the caffeine pills and who was getting placebo pills. Both groups then carried out 18 4-second sprints with a 2-minute recovery in between, and found that the group that had taken caffeine had a greater rate of recovery, essentially, as they had 8.5% greater power output at the latter stages of the sprints. So while the other group was beginning to fatigue, the caffeine in their body allowed them to resist against the fatigue much more efficiently, allowing them to perform much better at the latter stages of the trials. And another study by Stewart et al. 2005 gathered 9 male rugby players who ingested either caffeine or a placebo pill, similarly to the last test by Schneiker et al. 17 minutes before a rugby test, and they found that there was an increase in power output, not originally, but at the latter stages of the rugby test. So once again, this supports the evidence shown by Schneiker et al., as it is stating that the caffeine has helped them build almost a resistance to fatigue, which allows them to perform more consistently at the latter stages of exercise. A study by Seifert et al. 2011 focused on the more negative effects of caffeine abuse, however, and the serious abuse of caffeine. People who are consuming it more than they should every day, it can have serious effects on their health, such as seizures, diabetes, cardiac abnormalities, things like heart palpitations, things like that, and behavioural disorders, as it's like an addiction to them. So the studies were weak in the aspect that they had a very small sample size. However, apart from this area, they were very strong. They had a great amount of control over the test, ensuring that they knew what the athletes were eating when they were training and things like that. There was not a lot of deviation in behaviour between the testing periods. They both had complete data sets, meaning no one had pulled out, and they both had a pilot week for the test, so they knew exactly what they were going to be doing, they knew exactly what they were getting themselves into before the test even occurred. So overall, caffeine is a drug that should be considered for an athlete in more team sports, things more like high intensity sports, things that need reaction speeds, things that need resistance to fatigue, as it does have beneficial effects on performance, as mentioned previously. However, caffeine should not be overly consumed, as this could then lead to quite negative effects on someone's health. But overall, caffeine is not prohibited by any governing bodies. It is not illegal, and therefore there is no reason why an athlete should not use it in sports that don't require precision and things like that. And this is just the reference page.